The wind howled through the dense canopy of iridescent foliage, casting shifting patterns of luminescent blue and violet across the forest floor. Captain Ryker Hayes crouched low, his breath steady as his knife slid through the thick hide of the monstrous beast sprawled before him. It had taken 3 well-placed shots from his pulse rifle to bring the thing down, and even then, the damn thing had almost taken his arm with it. The creature's flesh was dense, the texture somewhere between reptilian scales and sinewy muscle. As Ryker cut away a sizable chunk, he held it up to the faint light filtering through the leaves. It didn't stink, which was a good sign. He brought the raw meat to his lips, took a bite, and chewed slowly. Tough but edible, a bit like old venison. Satisfied, he carved more, already imagining the taste with a bit of fire roasting. From her perch above, Princess Kaela Saryth watched in mute horror, her body rigid with disbelief. The man, this crude, reckless human, was consuming the sacred predator of Velmara without a shred of hesitation. The apex hunter, a being revered by her people for its spiritual significance, reduced to nothing more than a meal. Her fingers curled against the bark of the tree she was hidden behind, her crystalline horns pulsing in alarmed shades of deep crimson. The human should not have survived this long. By all logic, he should have perished the moment he set foot on Velmara. The jungle alone was lethal, but more than that, he was an outsider, a trespasser. Yet he had been captured, then escaped, and now he was eating a Ryloth beast as if it were some common prey. Her heart pounded as she dropped from the tree, landing silently several feet behind him. "You are insane," she said, her voice cool, yet edged with something almost like fascination. Ryker turned, unbothered, chewing as he regarded her. His heterochromatic eyes, one green, one ice blue, glimmered under the alien starlight. "And you're dramatic," he countered, swallowing. "Want a bite?" Kaela recoiled as if he had insulted her lineage. "You dare mock me?" "I mean, if I'm gonna die here, I might as well get a last meal in," he said with a shrug, spearing another hunk of meat onto the tip of his blade. "Turns out this thing isn't half bad." Kaela took a slow step forward, her bioelectric senses thrumming against his presence. He was amused, actually amused. Where any other creature would have cowered before her, he held no fear. Even as he stood on a world that was not his, surrounded by dangers he could not possibly comprehend, he simply endured. "You should not be alive," she murmured. Ryker smirked. "That makes 2 of us." Kaela's lips parted slightly, taken aback by the easy way he spoke, the casual defiance in his tone. This was a man who had no reverence for her world, no understanding of what he had done. Yet there was something infuriatingly compelling about him. She folded her arms, her hair shifting from deep violet to a thoughtful silver hue. "That creature is sacred. Sacred tastes like overcooked steak," Ryker mused, taking another bite. He watched her carefully, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her silver eyes burned with something between disdain and curiosity. "What, were you keeping it as a pet?" Kaela exhaled sharply. "It is a guardian of our people. To slay it is an offense punishable by exile." Ryker wiped his blade on his sleeve, unimpressed. "Guess I was already dead the moment I set foot on your planet, huh?" She hesitated. There was truth in his words. The council had deemed him a threat, an intruder to be dealt with, yet something gnawed at her. The man before her was not like the conquerors of old. He was not here for dominion nor power. He was here simply because he had nowhere else to be. Her fingers twitched at her sides. "Why do you not fear us?" Ryker tilted his head, studying her as if she were the puzzle, not the other way around. "You're not the first people who have wanted me dead," he said after a beat. "And you won't be the last." Kaela's expression flickered, the shifting luminescence in her horns betraying something more, curiosity, perhaps even something softer. She knew better than to trust an outsider. Knew better than to let her intrigue get the best of her. But something about this human defied every expectation, every assumption she had been taught. "You are reckless," she finally said, "and foolish." "Maybe," Ryker admitted, "but I'm still standing." For a moment, they simply stared at one another, the alien wilderness humming around them, unseen creatures shifting in the undergrowth. Then Kaela spoke, quieter this time. "You do not belong here." Ryker sheathed his knife, his gaze unyielding. "Neither do you." Her breath hitched slightly, caught off guard by the weight of his words. She had spent her life belonging to her people, yet always feeling separate, distant. This human, this impossible man had seen through her in mere moments. A sharp crack echoed in the distance, footsteps. Not theirs. Kaela's pulse spiked. "You have been followed." Ryker's stance shifted, his fingers brushing the hilt of his weapon. "Well," he muttered, exhaling slowly, "guess we'll see if I'm still standing after this." Kaela stepped beside him, her body tense, her crystalline horns pulsing with a determined glow. "We fight together." Ryker grinned, his teeth gleaming under the alien moonlight. "Now that's my kind of welcome." The underbrush trembled as figures emerged from the shadows, their forms sleek and armored, their weapons humming with latent energy. Velmaran enforcers, Kaela's own people. Their silver-blue armor gleamed beneath the bioluminescent canopy, their helms concealing any sign of emotion. Kaela inhaled sharply, stepping forward before they could speak. "Hold your fire," she commanded, her voice steady. The lead enforcer, a towering figure with a curved energy blade at his hip, lowered his weapon slightly but did not relax. "Princess Saryth, step away from the human." His tone was crisp, devoid of patience. "He is to be taken into custody and delivered to the High Council. Immediate exile is the only suitable sentence for his crimes." Ryker exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders as he whispered under his breath. "So much for making friends." Kaela shot him a warning glance before addressing the enforcer again. "He is under my protection," she declared, lifting her chin. "He is not to be harmed." A murmur rippled through the assembled warriors, but the enforcer's stance remained rigid. "The human killed a Ryloth beast and consumed it. He has defiled our sacred laws." His silver irises narrowed beneath his helmet. "Even you cannot pardon this." Ryker smirked. "I don't suppose an apology would help." The enforcer stiffened, his grip tightening on his weapon. Kaela suppressed the urge to groan. This man had no concept of diplomacy. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I am not asking for a pardon," she said firmly. "I am demanding a chance to understand him, to question him properly. If we exile or execute without reason, we risk repeating the mistakes of our ancestors." The enforcer's gaze flickered, uncertainty creeping into his stance. "The council will not. The council will hear my words," Kaela interrupted, steel lacing her tone. "And if they do not, then they are not the leaders we believe them to be." Silence settled over the clearing. The enforcers exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of Kaela's title giving them pause. Ryker, sensing the shift, crossed his arms. "Look, I get it. I broke some kind of big, cosmic rule by eating that thing." He nodded toward the remains of the predator. "But let's be real. If it had eaten me, would you have given it a trial?" The lead enforcer stiffened, his jaw tightening. Ryker smirked. "Yeah, thought so." Kaela turned slightly, barely masking her surprise. For a man who had no grasp of their culture, he had cut straight to its hypocrisy with alarming precision. The lead enforcer exhaled sharply. "You will come with us, both of you." Kaela nodded. "Then let us proceed." Ryker sighed. "And here I was hoping to finish my meal." One of the enforcers roughly grabbed his arm, hauling him forward. Ryker tensed instinctively, but Kaela stepped between them. "You will not handle him as a prisoner," she said evenly. "He walks with us, not in chains." The enforcer hesitated, then released him. "Very well." Ryker shot her a glance as they started walking. "Guess I owe you one." Kaela kept her gaze ahead. "You owe me far more than that, human." They moved through the dense jungle in tense silence, the towering trees giving way to the glowing spires of Velmara's capital. The city shimmered in the distance, its crystalline structures refracting the twin moons above. As they approached, Ryker took in the grandeur of the architecture, tall, angular, and impossibly elegant, built in harmony with the nature around it. Unlike human cities which dominated landscapes, this place seemed to coexist with it. A massive archway loomed ahead, guarded by more enforcers. Beyond it, the council chamber awaited. Ryker whistled low. "Fancy place." Kaela did not respond. She was already bracing for the battle ahead. Not of weapons, but of words, and she did not know which would be more dangerous. The grand doors of the council chamber swung open with a low, resonant hum, revealing a vast hall bathed in the soft glow of bioluminescent flora. Towering crystalline pillars stretched to the domed ceiling, refracting light in shifting hues of blue and violet. At the center, a semicircle of robed figures sat upon raised thrones, their gazes impassive as Kaela and Ryker stepped forward, flanked by enforcers. Ryker took in the sight with measured curiosity. He had been in plenty of courtrooms before, military tribunals, backwater diplomacy meetings, even a few pirate strongholds that called themselves governments. But this was something else entirely. Kaela moved with purpose, her steps deliberate, her expression composed. "Esteemed council," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "I stand before you not to dispute the laws of our people, but to ask that we reconsider the sentence imposed upon this human." One of the elder counselors, a male with deep-set silver eyes and intricate crystalline horns, leaned forward. "Princess Saryth, there is no reconsideration. The human has violated the sanctity of our land, slain a guardian of the wilds and defiled it through consumption. The sentence is exile." "Or death," Ryker sighed under his breath. Not much of a middle ground there. Kaela cast him a quick, warning glance before addressing the council again. "I do not seek to justify his actions," she said, "but we must not let rigid tradition prevent us from seeing the greater truth." The council murmured among themselves, their voices hushed yet firm. Another elder, a woman with sharp, angular features, narrowed her gaze. "And what truth do you speak of, child?" Kaela lifted her chin. "That we do not understand humanity as we should." The chamber fell into silence. She turned, gesturing toward Ryker. "This human has survived where no outsider has before. He has eaten the flesh of a creature that should have been poison to him, yet he remains unharmed. If our world rejects him, why does he live? If he does not belong, why does he endure?" The elders exchanged glances, unease settling over them. Ryker took a step forward, earning stiff reactions from the enforcers. He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Look, I'm not here to tell you how to run your planet. You want me gone? Fine, just say so. But don't pretend this is about some sacred beast." His mismatched eyes flickered with something sharp. "This is about fear." The male elder bristled. "You presume to—" "Yeah, I do." Ryker cut him off, his tone casual but unyielding. "You fear what you don't understand, and trust me, I get it. I've seen entire civilizations tear themselves apart over that exact instinct. But here's the thing, fear doesn't make the truth go away." Kaela glanced at him, surprise flickering in her expression. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for something larger. Ryker folded his arms. "You don't know what humans are capable of. You don't know what we can withstand. And if you exile me without figuring that out, you'll just be waiting until the next human shows up. And the next. And the next. Sooner or later, you'll have to decide whether to keep treating us like a plague or an opportunity." The chamber was deathly quiet. Kaela seized the moment. "We have a chance to learn, to adapt, to grow beyond the mistakes of our ancestors." She looked directly at the council. "Or we can remain stagnant and blind and let fear rule us." The female elder studied her for a long moment, then exhaled through her nose. "You always were bold, child." The male elder frowned deeply. "And yet boldness does not erase law." Another counselor, older and more contemplative, finally spoke. Perhaps not, but perhaps law must evolve as all things do. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. After a tense pause, the elder woman turned to Kaela. If you are to take responsibility for this human, you will bear the burden of his actions. Kaela's breath hitched. I understand. Ryker blinked. Wait, what? The male elder sighed. Should he disrupt our order again, it will be your title, your very place in this empire, that will suffer. Kaela's jaw tightened. Then so be it. Ryker stared at her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't used to people taking risks for him. The council exchanged final glances before the elder woman lifted her hand. Then it is decided. The human stays. But know this, princess. Your choice has bound you to him in ways you may not yet realize. Kaela met her gaze, unflinching. I accept that. Ryker ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Well, that's one way to get a new babysitter. Kaela shot him a dry look. You are insufferable, he smirked. You're not the first to say that. As they exited the chamber, Ryker glanced sideways at her. So, you really just bet your whole royal reputation on me, huh? Kaela kept her gaze ahead. Try not to make me regret it. Ryker grinned. No promises. The moment they stepped beyond the chamber doors, Kaela exhaled sharply, tension still lingering in her shoulders. Ryker cast her a sidelong glance as they descended the grand steps leading into the lower city. The glowing spires of Velmara loomed above them, their crystalline structures refracting the soft moonlight, but the air between them was anything but serene. So, Ryker started, hands in his pockets. That was fun. Kaela shot him a glare. You speak of it as if it were a game. Wasn't it? He smirked. Felt like a gamble to me, and you just went all in. She didn't answer immediately. She knew what she had done. She had bound herself to him in ways she had never imagined, placing her trust in a man she barely understood, a species she had only ever been warned about. And yet, standing before the council, listening to him speak, truly speak, not just joke or deflect, something in her had shifted. I did what was necessary, she said finally. It was not for you, but for my people. If we are to move beyond our past, we must learn to understand what we fear. Ryker hummed, amused. Yeah, sure, had nothing to do with my charming personality. Kaela ignored him, her expression cooling. Your presence will not be taken lightly. The people will question this decision. Some will even challenge it, he shrugged. Let them. If they want me gone, I'll leave. No skin off my back. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Do not pretend you are unaffected by this. Your life was in the hands of those counselors, and had they chosen differently, you would not be standing here now. He met her gaze, his smirk fading just slightly. Yeah. And yet, here I am. Kaela studied him, her bioelectric senses picking up the undercurrents beneath his words. He was a man who had long accepted the possibility of death, not with fear but with an unsettling kind of indifference. It made him difficult to read, harder to trust. And yet, the defiance in his stance was not arrogance. It was resilience. She inhaled deeply, turning back toward the city. You will remain within the inner district until further notice. I will oversee your presence personally. Ryker raised a brow. Ah, so you're my royal chaperone now. If that is how you wish to see it. Her tone was clipped, but he could hear the unspoken warning beneath it. Fine, he said, stretching his arms over his head. But if you're gonna keep me here, I'm gonna need something to eat. And before you start, I get it, no more sacred animals. Kaela pressed her lips together. The very thought of him eating another Velmaran creature made her stomach twist. We have food suitable for your physiology, he grinned. Yeah, I bet it's all delicate and elegant like everything else in this city. She lifted a brow. Would you prefer something barbaric? He chuckled. You have no idea. They continued through the glowing streets, the enforcers keeping a careful distance as they trailed them. Kaela could feel the eyes of passing citizens upon them, whispers already spreading. A human walking freely among them was an impossibility they had never considered. And worse still, he was under her protection. The moment they reached the palace's private quarters, Ryker let out a low whistle, surveying the grand archways and shimmering halls with open appreciation. "Gotta hand it to you, Princess. You live in style." "It is my duty," she corrected. He smirked. "Must be exhausting." Kaela turned to him then, her gaze sharp. "You speak as if your life has been one of hardship, but you too carry the weight of your choices, do you not? You bear scars, not only on your skin but within you. I can feel them." Ryker's smirk faltered just slightly. "That one of your fancy Velmaran tricks?" She tilted her head, her crystalline horns shifting to a deep indigo. "It is not a trick. It is simply what I am." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt charged, humming with something unspoken. Then Ryker exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, we all carry things, don't we?" Kaela studied him, as if searching for something beneath the surface. "Some burdens are meant to be shared." He let out a soft chuckle, though there was no real humor in it. "Not sure you want to be carrying mine." She didn't look away. "Perhaps I already am." The words lingered between them, heavier than she had intended, but she did not take them back. Ryker held her gaze for a long moment before finally shaking his head. "You're a strange one, Princess." Kaela's lips curved ever so slightly. "And you are reckless." His smirk returned. "Yeah, but I'm still standing, aren't I?" She exhaled through her nose, turning away. "For now." The soft hum of the palace's energy field buzzed faintly in the background, as Kaela led Ryker through a series of elegant corridors, their steps echoing in the vast, crystalline halls. He noted the precision of the architecture, every line sharp yet flowing, an eerie harmony of nature and advanced engineering. "You know," Ryker mused as they passed through an open archway leading to a spacious balcony overlooking the capital, "for a planet that supposedly doesn't want me here, you sure know how to roll out the luxury treatment." Kaela did not slow her pace. "You are not being treated as a guest, Captain. This is containment." Ryker placed a hand over his chest in mock offense. "You wound me, Princess." She ignored him, moving toward a small console embedded into the balcony's edge. A soft, glowing panel emerged at her touch, and with a flick of her fingers, a holographic projection materialized before them, displaying an array of food items. "I have filtered selections based on your physiology," she stated. "Select what you will consume." Ryker squinted at the glowing menu. Some of the items looked vaguely familiar: fruits, grain-like substances, even what he assumed were cuts of meat from animals that weren't sacred. Others, however, pulsed with faint bioluminescence, shifting color like living organisms. "Yeah, see, I appreciate the effort," he said, scratching the back of his head, "but I gotta ask, any of this stuff gonna try and eat me from the inside out?" Kaela's expression was unreadable. "If I wished you dead, human, you would not be standing here." Ryker grinned. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Just choose." He scrolled through the options, finally selecting something that looked the least likely to glow in his stomach. A confirmation beeped, and within moments, a small hovering drone entered from a side corridor, carrying a tray of carefully arranged food. It set the meal before him on a nearby table, then wordlessly retreated. Ryker sat down, surveying the plate with mild suspicion. "Looks edible." Kaela folded her arms. "It is sustenance, high praise." He stabbed a piece of the meat with his fork and took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Not bad," he admitted. "Tastes kinda like," he frowned. "I don't actually know what this tastes like." Kaela arched a brow. "Then how do you determine if you like it?" He swallowed, considering. "Guess I just know what I don't like." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "A peculiar way to measure value," he smirked. "Yeah, well, you ever eat something just because you had to survive?" She hesitated. "No." Ryker nodded as if he expected that answer. "Then you wouldn't get it." Kaela's gaze flickered over him, her bioelectric senses picking up the subtle shifts in his emotions. Beneath his humor, beneath the sharp-edged exterior, there was something else, something quiet buried deep. He had lived through things few could comprehend. For the first time, she wondered what kind of world had shaped him into this man. "Your people," she said after a moment. "Do they all share your resilience?" Ryker let out a short laugh. "Resilience? That's a nice way of putting it." He leaned back in his chair, rolling his shoulder. "Humans adapt. We don't always do it well, but we survive. That's what we do." Kaela studied him. "And is that enough? Merely surviving?" The question made him pause. He glanced down at his plate, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes it's all you have." She did not miss the shift in his tone, the way his usual sarcasm dimmed if only for a moment. "You speak as one who has lost," she observed quietly. Ryker's jaw tensed slightly, but he didn't look away. "Yeah," he said, "and you speak like someone who's afraid to." Kaela's breath hitched slightly. For a man who understood so little of her world, he had a way of cutting straight through pretense. She turned toward the balcony's edge, looking out over the city. "Velmara has thrived for centuries because we do not take reckless risks. We do not rush into the unknown blindly," Ryker exhaled. "And yet here we are," she glanced back at him. "Yes, here we are." For a moment silence stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. Then a soft chime echoed through the air, breaking the moment. Kaela turned toward the holographic panel as a message flashed across the screen. Her expression darkened. Ryker frowned. "That look doesn't scream good news." Kaela read the message quickly, her crystalline horns pulsing a faint shade of concern. "There has been an unauthorized incursion near the outer province." Ryker's gaze sharpened. "Incursion? An attack," she clarified. "A faction known as the Kryth'val. They have long sought to test our defenses." Ryker stood, setting his fork down. "And let me guess, you don't think this is just a test?" Kaela's expression was grim. "No, I do not." She turned to face him fully. "I must attend to this matter immediately. You will remain here." Ryker crossed his arms, "And if I say no," she narrowed her eyes. "Then you will prove yourself to be as reckless as I feared," he smirked. "Come on, princess. You think I'd sit this one out?" Kaela's gaze held his, searching, weighing. Then, with a measured breath, she said, "If you come, you follow my orders, without question." Ryker grinned. "Well, that'll be a first." Kaela turned away, striding toward the exit. "Then let us see if you survive." He followed without hesitation. The transport glided through the air, silent and sleek, slicing through the violet-tinged night as it carried them toward the outskirts of the Velmaran province. Kaela sat at the command console, eyes locked on the holographic display as streams of data flickered across the screen. The Kryth'val attack had been swift, precise, an intentional breach on Velmara's border defenses, targeting a critical energy relay hub. Ryker leaned against the curved wall of the cabin, arms crossed. "So tell me about these guys," he said, watching her carefully. "Who the hell are the Kryth'val, and why do they want a piece of you?" Kaela didn't look up. "They are nomadic conquerors, moving from system to system, consuming resources and dismantling civilizations that do not bend to their rule. They have tested our defenses for years, but never with such precision." Ryker frowned. "Sounds like someone gave them a map." She stiffened slightly, but did not respond. He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Great. So we've got space raiders with inside intel, and I'm guessing they don't play nice." Kaela's silver eyes flickered up to meet his. "If they breach our inner cities, there will be no negotiations." Ryker nodded slowly. "Got it. Shoot first, don't bother with questions." Her horns pulsed a deep blue. "I do not wish for bloodshed, but if that is their intent, we must respond in kind." Ryker tilted his head slightly. "And your people, they ready for this?" She hesitated just barely. "Velmarans have not fought an active war in centuries." Ryker let out a low whistle. "Well, that's not reassuring." Kaela's gaze hardened. "Do not mistake our discipline for weakness." Ryker smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." A sharp beep echoed through the cabin, drawing Kaela's attention back to the display. The ship's sensors had locked onto an active engagement zone just beyond the border spires. Fires flickered across the landscape below, glowing orange against the darkened terrain. Kaela stood. "Prepare yourself." Ryker pushed off the wall, rolling his shoulders. "Any chance you got a weapon that doesn't require fancy Velmara training?" She motioned toward a compartment near the rear of the cabin. "Take what you need." Ryker strode over, pressing a hand against the panel. It hissed open, revealing a small arsenal of energy-based weaponry. He picked up a sleek rifle, testing its weight before grabbing a secondary sidearm. Kaela eyed him. "You are familiar with energy-based weapons," Ryker shrugged. "They all work the same. Point, shoot, don't get shot." Her expression remained neutral, though her gaze lingered as he holstered the sidearm at his hip with a practiced ease. The transport slowed as it neared the outer district, the reinforced walls of the Velmara energy hub coming into view. Crimson tracer fire cut through the air, exchanged between Velmara enforcers and the armored figures of the Kryth'val raiders below. The attacking force moved with lethal coordination, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the emergency lights. Kaela exhaled sharply. "They are more organized than before." Ryker narrowed his gaze. "Yeah, that's not a random raid, that's a tactical assault." She turned to him. "Then we stop them." The transport touched down, its hull shielding them from incoming fire as the hatch slid open. Kaela moved first, stepping onto the battlefield with precise, calculated movements. The moment her presence was known, the Velmara enforcers stiffened, rallying behind her. Ryker followed, stepping into the fray with his rifle raised. A Kryth'val soldier spotted him immediately, hesitating just briefly, long enough for Ryker to fire. The shot struck center mass, sending the raider sprawling. The battlefield erupted. Kaela's dual energy blades ignited in a blur of white-hot light, cutting through the air as she engaged the enemy with fluid precision. Ryker moved in sync, keeping to the periphery, laying down cover fire as she carved a path through the Kryth'val ranks. More enforcers joined the fight, emboldened by their princess's presence. The Kryth'val faltered, their initial advantage slipping, but Ryker knew better than to think they had already won. A distant rumble sent a shockwave through the ground. Kaela's head snapped toward the horizon. Her crystalline horns pulsed with warning. "Something is coming." Ryker reloaded his weapon. "I was afraid you'd say that." From the smoke and wreckage beyond the battlefield, a towering figure emerged, massive, armored, its body humming with stored energy. Kryth'val technology, unlike anything Ryker had seen before. Kaela's grip tightened around her blades. Ryker let out a breath. "Well, Princess, looks like your first war just got a lot more interesting." The ground trembled beneath their feet as the massive Kryth'val war machine lumbered forward, its exoskeletal plating shimmering with pulsing veins of crimson energy. Towering over the battlefield, it moved with unsettling precision, far too controlled for mere brute force. Ryker whistled under his breath. "Okay, that's new." Kaela's grip tightened around her weapons. This was not in their usual strategy. Ryker adjusted his rifle. "Yeah, well, I'm guessing usual strategy just changed." The war machine stopped just beyond the wreckage of a fallen transport, its core thrumming with barely contained energy. The remaining Kryth'val raiders regrouped around it, their confidence restored now that their trump card had arrived. One of them, clad in heavier armor than the rest, stepped forward. His voice carried through the battlefield, deep and distorted through his helmet's modulation. "Velmarans, surrender the outpost and you will be spared." Kaela's horns pulsed, a faint violet glow threading through the crystalline ridges. "Lies," Ryker nodded. "Yeah, I'm getting the burn it all down vibe." The Kryth'val leader turned his gaze toward them, his helmet's visor reflecting the flickering fires. "We know who you are, Princess. Your kind may cower behind their walls, but even now your empire weakens. Surrender and you may yet live to serve a higher cause." Kaela stepped forward, her expression cold. "Velmara will not kneel." The leader tilted his head slightly. "Then you will burn." With a sharp gesture, he raised his arm. The war machine roared to life. Ryker barely had time to move before the first pulse cannon fired. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, tearing through the ground and forcing Velmaran enforcers to scatter. Kaela leaped, her form a blur of motion as she avoided the blast, landing gracefully behind a set of barricades. Ryker, less graceful but no less efficient, dove into cover beside her. "All right, Princess. Got a plan, or are we just winging this?" Kaela's mind worked quickly, analyzing the machine's structure. The core is housed within the thoracic plating. It is shielded but not invulnerable. Ryker peeked out from cover, firing a few shots to test the armor. The rounds sparked against the plating, leaving no impact. He exhaled. "So that's a no on brute force." Kaela's gaze flickered across the battlefield. "The energy capacitors along its legs are exposed. If we disable them, it will lose mobility." Ryker grinned. "See, that's a plan. Let's do that." Kaela's eyes gleamed with determination. "We move together." He smirked. "Thought you'd never ask." The Kryth'val war machine fired another barrage, forcing them to separate. Kaela darted left, her energy blades igniting as she engaged the surrounding raiders. Ryker took the opposite flank, weaving through the wreckage with practiced ease, moving toward the war machine's legs. The ground beneath him cracked as the machine's massive foot came down. Ryker barely avoided being crushed, rolling behind a fallen structure before raising his rifle. "All right, big guy. Let's see how you like this." He aimed for the exposed energy capacitors, squeezing the trigger. The first shot struck, sending a surge of electricity crackling across the machine's plating. The second shot hit its mark, rupturing one of the stabilizers. The war machine groaned, its movements faltering slightly. Kaela took the opportunity to leap onto its chassis, driving one of her blades into a weak point near the shoulder joint. Sparks erupted as she carved through the armor, her movements swift and precise. The Kryth'val leader shouted a command and several raiders turned their attention toward her. Ryker swore. Not happening. He abandoned his cover, moving with deadly efficiency as he took down the advancing soldiers. His shots were precise, each impact sending a raider crumpling to the ground. Kaela reached the machine's core access panel, her blade slicing through the lock mechanism. As the plating hissed open, the exposed energy core pulsed violently. She turned, locking eyes with Ryker. Now, Ryker didn't hesitate. He fired a single, well-placed shot. The core overloaded instantly. A deep, guttural hum filled the air before the machine's internal power ruptured. The entire structure shuddered violently, arcs of energy coursing through its limbs. Kaela leapt free just as the war machine collapsed, crashing into the battlefield with a deafening impact. Silence followed. The remaining Kryth'val, seeing their advantage lost, hesitated. Kaela stood tall, bloodied but unbroken. "Leave," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority, "and do not return." The Kryth'val leader glared at her, but even he knew the battle was lost. With a sharp motion, he signaled a retreat. The raiders vanished into the night. Ryker exhaled, lowering his weapon. "Well, that was a thing." Kaela turned to him, her silver eyes unreadable. "You fought well," he grinned. "You're not bad yourself, Princess." She regarded him for a long moment before turning back toward the ruined battlefield. The night was quiet again, but the war was far from over. And for the first time, Kaela realized she would not face it alone. The fires still smoldered across the battlefield, casting jagged shadows against the ruins of the energy hub. Velmaran enforcers moved swiftly, securing the area, tending to the wounded and assessing the damage. The scent of scorched metal and ozone hung heavy in the air. Ryker sat on a chunk of collapsed plating, rifle resting across his knees, watching as Kaela directed the aftermath with unwavering precision. Even after the battle, she moved with the same calculated control, checking defenses, issuing orders, ensuring there were no lingering threats. She hadn't stopped moving since the last Kryth'val retreated. He let out a low breath, wiping the sweat from his brow before pushing himself to his feet. "So do you ever take a break, or is that some royal thing?" Kaela glanced at him briefly, her silver eyes unreadable. "There is no time for rest," Ryker stretched, rolling his shoulders. "Yeah, but exhaustion's a hell of a thing, trust me." She didn't answer, instead turning toward the lead enforcer, speaking in a low voice. Ryker caught only pieces of the conversation, discussions of structural damage, casualties, a possible return strike. His fingers twitched. He had seen this before. A world on the edge of something bigger. A battle that was only a test, a warning. And the way Kaela carried herself, the weight of responsibility settling over her shoulders, he knew that look too. She was bracing herself for something she wasn't ready to admit. Ryker sighed, stepping closer. "All right, Princess, cards on the table. That wasn't just a raid." Kaela's gaze flickered toward him. "I am aware." He gestured toward the wreckage of the war machine. "Then say it." She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "This was an escalation," Ryker nodded. "And if you don't act fast, it's gonna be a war." She studied him, her expression composed, but he saw the tension in her jaw. "We do not seek war." "Yeah, well, I don't think the Kryth'val care what you seek." He gestured around them. "They wanted to see how far they could push. Now they know your defenses can be broken." Kaela exhaled slowly. "We will adapt," Ryker shook his head. "That's not enough. You need to be ready before they come back." She narrowed her eyes. "And you assume you have the answers." "I assume I've been in enough losing fights to know how this ends." His voice was quieter now, but no less firm. "You wait, you hesitate, you try to play by rules your enemy doesn't care about. You lose." Kaela's crystalline horns pulsed with an unreadable shade. "We are not without defenses. Neither were the last people they conquered." That made her pause. He could see the thoughts shifting behind her gaze, the careful calculations. But there was something else, too, something reluctant. Ryker stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're a damn good fighter, your people. They trust you, but you're fighting a war you weren't prepared for." He let that sink in. "Let me help." Kaela's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to protest, but no words came. He wasn't wrong. Velmara had survived for centuries without true war. They were warriors by nature, but war itself had been avoided for generations. She had studied tactics, trained in combat, but she had never lived through a war, not the way he had, and she could feel the truth in his words. This would not stop. The Kryth'val would return, stronger, smarter. She had protected him. Now perhaps it was time to let him protect her world. Her voice was softer when she finally spoke. "You would fight for a world that is not yours," Ryker smirked. "Princess, I already did." She exhaled, shaking her head. "You are reckless. And you," he said, crossing his arms, "are starting to admit you need me." Her expression remained impassive, but her horns pulsed faintly with a soft, silvery glow. "Very well, Captain Hayes," he blinked. "Did you just... was that my name instead of human?" She turned away. "Do not let it go to your head." He grinned, following her as she strode toward the command center. Too late. As they moved through the ruins, something shifted between them, subtle, unspoken, but undeniably there. She was no longer just tolerating his presence. She had accepted him as part of this fight. And for the first time in a long time, Ryker felt like he had something worth standing for. The alarm sirens blared across the capital as the Kryth'val fleet descended, their warships breaking through the upper atmosphere like falling stars. The sky burned red with streaks of plasma fire as Velmaran defenses activated, energy barriers flickering under the first wave of bombardment. Kaela stood at the central war table, her silver eyes scanning the tactical projections hovering in the air before her. The Kryth'val had not retreated to regroup. They had been preparing for an all-out invasion. Ryker stood beside her, arms crossed as he studied the display. They're not testing anymore. They're here to finish this. Kaela's horns pulsed a faint indigo, the only sign of the weight pressing against her. Then we will ensure they do not succeed. The lead enforcer stepped forward. Princess, our forces are holding the outer sectors, but the Kryth'val are focusing on breaching the capital's energy grid. If they disable it, our entire city will fall, Kaela nodded. Deploy reinforcements to the eastern quadrant. We must hold them at the gates. The enforcer bowed before moving to relay the orders. Ryker leaned closer to Kaela, lowering his voice. They're throwing everything they've got at you. This isn't just about territory anymore, she exhaled. No, this is extermination. Ryker's jaw tightened. Then let's make sure they fail. Kaela turned to him fully. There is something else. She hesitated, then continued. Our intelligence has intercepted a transmission. The Kryth'val are led by a warlord known as Tyracos. He is aboard the command ship coordinating the assault. Ryker raised a brow. Let me guess. Cut off the head, the body stumbles. She gave a small nod. It may be our only chance. He grinned, checking his rifle. Well, I was getting bored down here anyway. Kaela watched him for a moment before stepping closer. This will not be easy. Wouldn't be fun if it was. For a fraction of a second, she allowed herself to soften. You are reckless, he smirked, and you're starting to like it. She huffed quietly, then turned, motioning toward the transport bay. Come, if we are to end this, we must go now. The stolen Kryth'val assault craft hummed beneath their feet as it ascended through the battle-torn skies. Kaela sat at the controls, her fingers moving with steady precision as she guided the vessel toward the command ship looming above the capital. Ryker stood beside her, checking his weapons. You sure this disguise is gonna work? She adjusted the control panel. Kryth'val ships do not use traditional identification codes. Their forces rely on signal recognition. So long as we do not draw attention, they will assume we are one of theirs. Ryker smirked. So don't get caught, got it? The ship drifted into the Kryth'val fleet's formation, weaving between the massive warships. The capital below was ablaze, but Velmaran forces still fought fiercely. The battle was far from over. As the command ship loomed ahead, Kaela exhaled. We are in range. Ryker cracked his knuckles. Then let's go say hi to this warlord of yours. She activated the docking protocol, and the ship latched onto the command vessel's hangar bay. The moment the hatch opened, they moved, silent, precise, cutting through the corridors with practiced efficiency. The Kryth'val command bridge was heavily guarded, but Kaela was faster. Her energy blades ignited, cutting through the first two guards before they could react. Ryker fired clean shots, dropping another before he could sound an alarm. They advanced quickly, moving deeper into the ship until at last the bridge doors loomed before them. Kaela turned to Ryker. This is it. He gave her a small smirk. Princess, if we die, I just want you to know I regret nothing. She arched a brow. Then let us ensure we do not. The doors slid open. Inside, Tyracos stood at the center of the bridge, his massive form clad in obsidian armor, his four crimson eyes narrowing as they entered. Ah, the Princess of Velmara, he mused, his voice a deep, reverberating growl. And her pet human. Ryker exhaled. Oh, I hate him already. Kaela took a step forward, her stance unshaken. Your forces will not take my world. Tyracos let out a low chuckle. Your world is already burning. She lifted her blade. Not for long, the warlord smirked. Then let us end this. The battle was instant. Tyracos moved with terrifying speed for his size, his twin battle axes swinging through the air with lethal force. Kaela ducked, her blades clashing against his weapons in a shower of sparks. Ryker rolled to the side, taking shots at the warlord's exposed flank, but the Kryth'val's armor deflected most of the impact. Tyracos snarled, shifting his focus to Ryker. "You are an annoyance." Ryker grinned. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The warlord lunged, but Kaela intercepted, her blade slicing through the plating along his shoulder. Tyracos roared in pain, staggering back. Ryker wasted no time. He dashed forward, seizing the moment to fire a direct shot into the warlord's chest. The blast tore through the exposed armor. Tyracos let out a guttural gasp, stumbling. His axes dropped to the floor, his massive form collapsing onto one knee. Kaela stepped forward, her blade pressed to his throat. For the first time, the warlord's gaze wavered. "You," he exhaled sharply. "You are not your ancestors." She held his gaze. "No, I am better." With a final stroke, she ended it. The warlord slumped motionless. Ryker let out a breath. Well, that was satisfying. Kaela turned toward the ship's control console. "The Kryth'val forces are still attacking. We must send the retreat command." Ryker stepped beside her. "And they'll listen." She activated the command override. "They have no choice." The transmission echoed through the ship, relaying the warlord's final orders. Across the battlefield, Kryth'val forces hesitated. Without their leader, their coordination fractured, and then, one by one, they fell back. Ryker exhaled, leaning against the console. "That's it, huh?" Kaela watched the retreating ships. "It is over." A long silence settled between them, the weight of victory heavier than either expected. Ryker looked at her. "So what now?" She turned to him, studying him for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, she said, "We go home." And this time, she meant it. The return to Velmara was unlike anything Ryker had experienced before. The battle was won, but the weight of what had transpired still hung heavy in the air. The Kryth'val were gone, their fleet withdrawing beyond the outer systems. But the scars of war remained, burning structures, fractured defenses, and the lingering uncertainty of what came next. The city stood, but it had changed, just like them. As their transport descended onto the palace's landing platform, Kaela remained uncharacteristically silent. She stood at the viewport, watching the capital below, her silver eyes unreadable. Ryker leaned against the railing beside her, arms crossed. "You did it," he said after a long moment. She exhaled softly. "We did." He studied her profile, the soft glow of her crystalline horns dimmer than usual. He recognized that look, the aftermath of war when the adrenaline faded and the mind finally processed what had been done. It wasn't just relief, it was something deeper. "Not how you imagined your first war, huh?" he mused. She turned her gaze to him. "It is not something I ever wished to imagine." Ryker nodded. "Yeah, no one really does." The transport landed smoothly and the hatch hissed open. Outside, Velmaran enforcers and citizens gathered, awaiting their princess. There was no grand celebration, only quiet reverence. They had won, but at a cost. Kaela stepped forward, her posture regaining its usual poise. She addressed the people, her voice steady as she assured them that Velmara had endured, that they would rebuild, that they would emerge stronger than before. The crowd listened in silence before offering solemn bows, a gesture of respect. Ryker stayed back, watching her. She carried herself like a ruler now, no longer just the strategic diplomat but a leader shaped by battle. And yet, when her speech ended and she turned to him, something else lingered in her eyes, something only he could see. "Come with me," she said quietly. He followed her through the palace halls, up winding corridors until they reached the high balcony overlooking the capital. The city shimmered below, the twin moons casting their soft glow over the glass-like spires. She stood at the edge, hands resting on the railing. "Velmara will heal," she said, more to herself than to him. Ryker stepped beside her. "And you?" She hesitated, then turned to face him fully. "I do not know." He tilted his head. "That's a first," she exhaled, her gaze flickering with something unspoken. "My people look to me for strength." For certainty, but I have never walked this path before. I have made choices that cannot be undone. Her crystalline horns pulsed faintly, and I have allowed myself to trust when I was taught not to. Ryker held her gaze. Not regretting that, are you? She studied him for a long moment, then, almost imperceptibly, shook her head. No. Something in his chest tightened. Slowly she reached out, placing her hand over his, lightly, uncertain yet deliberate. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the moment settle. You are reckless, she murmured, her voice softer than it had ever been. Ryker smirked. And you still like that about me. She exhaled a quiet breath, not quite laughter, but close. Then, before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed him. It was not rushed, not desperate, just quiet certainty. A decision, made without hesitation. When she pulled back, he met her gaze, his smirk gentler now. So, that was a thing. She arched a brow. Are you incapable of taking anything seriously? He laughed softly. Oh, I'm taking this very seriously. She didn't reply, but the way she looked at him said enough. The war was over. Their paths had changed. And yet somehow they had found something neither had been looking for. She reached for his hand again, intertwining her fingers with his. A silent choice, a shared future. And for the first time in a long time, Ryker didn't feel like he had to run. He was exactly where he was meant to be.